Please remember to like and subscribe for more fanfics. Enjoy.
Coil, by Allegory for Hatred. This is Book 2 of Magic and Mystery. All rights go to Allegory for Hatred. I do not own this story. Chapter 21. Royal Flush. What in the world is Snape doing here? Snape blinked several times upon entering the room, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. Honestly, Dazai was kind of doing the same. He'd been half expecting Blaze and Pansy to show up. He knew they often skipped out on parties together. But Snape? The one Professor Dazai knew would be prickly about his presence. Here? Now? Draco was shooting him increasingly frantic looks. Dazai almost wanted to return them, but he pulled himself together quickly. There was no space for mistakes. Not now. Severus, Dazai greeted, cheeky. What brings you here? Snape shook himself visibly. He looked entirely rattled to his core, but that single motion seemed to shake most of his sense loose. But for once, he didn't berate Dazai for the overly familiar name. He took a step into the room, but halted before coming any closer. When Snape scanned Dazai's face intensely, something in his expression twisted. What is this? Dazai rocked back on his feet, wondering how long he could stall Snape without risking the professor seeing Mori. Witheringly, Dazai realized the answer was not long at all. He made his next decision accordingly. I'm visiting Draco, obviously. You should be at home. In Yokohama, Snape said stiffly. He looked between Draco and Dazai again, but his eyes kept slipping anxiously to the bandage over Dazai's eye. Eventually, he stopped fighting the urge and just kept his eyes on Dazai alone. What happened? It was not a question. I booked a plane, then Draco let me in the window, Dazai replied evasively, then realized he didn't exactly have the luxury of playing around like that right now. A second later he corrected sheepishly, Mori doesn't know I'm here. Hook. Snape's brows furrowed. He looked pained. You ran away from home? Line. Dazai nodded, accepting the guess's truth. Snape already looked to believe it before Dazai even agreed. Purposefully, Dazai scratched his cheek, right below where the bandages snugged over his eye. As expected, Snape's eyes widened. He reached every conclusion he wanted to reach. Dazai welcomed them. Shit, he hissed. Then, Severus was crossing the room and stooping down to hover nervously over Dazai, like he was afraid Dazai might shatter. And sinker. Snape believed the lie fully. He certainly wouldn't be questioning Lucius's allegiances if he thought Dazai had merely run away here to find refuge with a friend. Snape was too predictable like that, really. Always ready to find him hurting. Now all Dazai needed was for Snape to leave. If Draco's dad finds out Draco let me in, we'll all be in deep shit. Language, Snape chided distractedly. He was still looking Dazai up and down for other wounds. There was nothing to find, though. His less significant wounds were either covered or had already healed. He agreed. You can't stay here. Dazai pretended to waffle on that idea for several seconds. No, I'll head back home tonight, or tomorrow, if I can't catch a plane by then. Snape took that in with a furrowed brow. He stared in silence for a long moment, an odd expression warring on his face. But all the while Snape was clearly deep in thought. His eyes never once left Dazai. Dazai shifted uncomfortably despite himself. Snape's heavy stares had always left him feeling wrong-footed. And though Snape was often quite easy to distract, Dazai rarely liked doing so. Making the man angry was one thing, but tugging at Snape's concern for him was always uncomfortable. At least this time, the self-inflicted cuts on Dazai's arms were covered. A few feet to his side, Draco was looking equally out of his depths. When Dazai's eyes flicked to him, Snape shook himself out of his thoughts to follow his gaze. Mr. Malfoy, Snape said, clearly having only just remembered Draco was here as well. Your father doesn't know Mr. Dazai is here? Dazai and Draco traded a fast, silent look. Then, Draco was shaking his head. He flattened his shoulders and puffed out his chest, his usual pompous visage at last returning. He doesn't. And Dazai's right. He can't find out. Father is... He glanced to Dazai briefly, and only continued once he'd gotten an agreeing nod from the mafioso. Not Dazai's biggest fan. No one is, Draco, Dazai said. But I still wouldn't want to be on his bad side in particular. Snape sighed, deep and heavy. He pinched the bridge of his nose, winced, then dropped his hand to his side instead. At once he drew in a windy breath and stood straight. Dazai and Draco both watched the professor with curious eyes. Very well, Snape said. His eyes flicked to Draco pointedly. You. Return to your room, or wherever you're meant to be right now. Draco blinked several times. Sir, he protested. I'm not leaving him alone. Don't forget, you're in my house, and I'm the adult. Snape hissed back, but Draco didn't look shaken off in the slightest. I will allow your insolence only this once, boy, because of the nature of our situation. Do not mistake this temporary leniency as an invitation to disrespect me. Draco bristled. He looked torn between arguing or backing off. Dazai spoke for him. I'm not even allowed to talk with my friend now, Snape is so cruel. As expected, Snape's focus snapped to him, countenance stiff and glare silencing. I am cleaning up this mess, Snape said as he gestured vaguely to the office around them. Mr. Malfoy, go back to your room. Mr. Desai will be coming with me. Dazai and Draco both straightened at that, Dazai like an expectant dog, and Draco judging. He can't leave, Draco stressed. He blinked at his own interjection, then hurriedly amended. If people see him here. No one will see him, Snape reassured, but his patience was sounding agitated. I will take him out the back. Again, Draco looked ready to say something, and again Dazai didn't let him. They were running on a dwindling and uncertain amount of time. Dazai wanted to take this out before it was too late, before Mori or Lucius or Kuyu returned and their cover was blown. As long as Snape left soon, he wouldn't suspect Port Mafia's scheme. Dazai scratched a bandage on his wrist. I think Snape is kidnapping me. Quiet. It is as I told you previously, Mr. Dazai. During your tenure as a student of Hogwarts, you are legally under my care. It's hardly kidnapping if I take you back to campus. Draco glanced at him, curious. Dazai ignored him. Classes haven't resumed yet, Dazai commented. Snape grunted. No. But I can't allow you to go on like this. Seeing as it is well within my right to do so, I will be taking you somewhere safe for the remaining duration of winter break. Dazai pretended to think it over for a few seconds. In reality, however, he was quite eager to get moving. When Draco looked at him in askance, Dazai declared, If you say so, I do, Snape confirmed. He turned back to Draco. Room, now. Draco shot Dazai one final glance before saying, After I clean up Dazai's mess. He inclined his head to the shattered paperweight. Very well. Snape eyed the debris, assessing, before shaking himself. Problem child, come. Snape waited just a second for Dazai to follow before turning back out the door. He checked the hall twice both ways before nodding. Then, swiftly, he took the right side corridor away from the busy ballroom. It was long, empty, and presumably took them to one of the mansion's back exits. Just before closing the door at their backs, Dazai spun around to give Draco a double thumbs up. Draco's frown was the only response he received. Hurry, boy. Dazai skipped to keep up with Snape's long stride. I'm hurrying, sir. Snape watched him over his back. He sighed. You can't even stay out of trouble while on vacation. They turned one corner, then another. Dazai didn't recognize their surroundings, but there wasn't an overdosing amount of magic in the air. He didn't think these stairs and doors were enchanted like the ones at Hogwarts. Still, the unfamiliarity of the Malfoy mansion had him treading closely on Snape's heels. The threat of becoming lost still hung over him. I told you, it's the trouble that finds me. I'm perfectly innocent. Snape grunted, and when Dazai looked at him closely, he thought the potion's master looked especially tired. Cautiously, Snape led him past a series of clearly unused bedrooms, an ugly but expensive collection of art, and a pearlescent bathroom. All the while Snape stared dead ahead at his destination. Dazai trailed behind him no less fast, looking around as they walked for any sign of partygoers. Or worse, Mori. But the Malfoy estate was empty, except for the busy ballroom and kitchen, which Snape had quickly ushered him past. After a long, intense walk through the mansion, they finally arrived at their goal, a clear glass door that led to a back garden. Snape waited until Dazai was standing outside beside an angry-looking fern before finally relaxing his shoulders. He cleared his throat. "We'll take the night bus. Keep up." Dazai quirked a brow, but still followed obediently when Snape gestured him. They walked all the way around the mansion to the front, some ways away from the actual building and nearer instead to a paved and winding road. It was quiet here. The sky was darkening, but the ball was still far from over. The road was empty when Snape lifted his wand to hail the night bus. Because Dazai had ridden the night bus last year, he wasn't surprised when a triple-decker bus bounded down the path wildly several seconds later. Snape returned his wand to his cloak. The doors propped themselves open and Snape indicated for Dazai to enter first. He did, but immediately upon boarding a surge of magic suddenly surrounded him. Dazai shivered. It was like walking into a spider web or a thin linen curtain. The magic caught on his skin and traipsed with him all the way to their seat. Unsure what magically fueling the bus, Dazai wisely kept his bare skin to himself. Just in case. He wore a disgruntled expression. "What?" Snape intoned, sitting beside him. Dazai had chosen a seat near to the bus's middle, not wanting to risk being seen by boarders near the front, but also not willing to walk all the way to the back with this filmy sensation on him. Rather than answer, Dazai gestured generally to the bus surrounding them. Snape squinted at him for several seconds before his eyes suddenly widened. His head snapped up to look at the seats, the windows, the stairs with new understanding. He whirled back on Dazai. "You didn't have a problem last time." Dazai merely shrugged. Last year he'd gotten a headache on the night bus. But in all honesty, Dazai hadn't known what he'd been feeling back then. The idea of magical sensitivity was unknown to him. The nuances of spells and charms and hexes a mystery. Now, armed with knowledge and experience, Dazai was no differently bogged down by the magical sensations of the night bus. He only had the sense to articulate it now. He felt it in the air and on his skin, an animation charm, among several other complex, intertwined enchantments. Perhaps a speed spell. Without warning, the bus suddenly kicked to life. Inertia braced Dazai hard into the back of his seat. Beside him, Snape barely seemed to have noticed the change, except for a slight stiffening of his shoulders. Within a second, the world had become a colorful blur outside the window. Definitely a speed-enhancing spell, Dazai grouched internally. Though he'd never seen such a spell cast in person before, he was certain that it must be the zippy-zappy magic signature he was sensing. "Do you need off the bus?" Dazai shook his head. "It just feels strange. I'm not going to throw up on you," he teased. Snape sniffed, unamused. "Tell me if that changes." "Sure," Dazai replied, still teasing. Snape shot him a glare. The night bus was fast enough that it didn't take long to reach their destination. It zoomed through cities and forests and countrysides faster than Dazai could really make sense of the colorful blurs outside. In total, their trip lasted only about 5 minutes, during which they'd picked up 2 other passengers and delivered one of them to a busy-looking Italian restaurant. Without needing to be told, Dazai had attempted to duck himself into Snape's side whenever another passenger walked past. Unfortunately, it was difficult to make oneself invisible in a bus seat. Upon seeing the demon students sitting stiffly beside Severus Snape, their eyes had widened, and they'd hastened to find a seat far, far away. Whatever would come of that, Dazai could only guess. But at the very least, they couldn't connect him to Lucius. He was counting that as a victory. When the night bus finally rolled to its last stop, Dazai stared out the window confusedly. "Up," Snape told him, already getting to his feet. "This is our stop." Dazai glanced at Snape, then back out the window. "This isn't Hogwarts," he said haltingly. Outside, none of the recognizable peaks and spires of Hogwarts pierced into the sky. Nor did he see any of the familiar posts surrounding platform 9 3/4. And although there was a rather oppressive-looking woodland around them, it wasn't the forbidden forest. Something gloomy seemed to hang over the entire area. When Dazai spotted a meager cottage at the edge of the tree line, this feeling of gloom only increased. Though perhaps it was only the waning daylight that gave the whole area a sense of abandonment. "Correct," Snape said in response. When Dazai still didn't budge for several long seconds, he sighed. This is my home. The train to Hogwarts doesn't run this late, so we will be staying here for the evening. Now get up before the night bus takes you with it. As if in answer, the bus rumbled disagreeably under their feet. Dazai made a face. He quickly stood. This time it was Snape who led them out of the bus. The second Dazai's shoes crinkled onto frost-covered grass. The night bus's doors automatically shut. It shot into the woods and vanished a breath later. The entire forest seemed to shake from the force of its departure. Dazai stared after it just long enough to see when the pine trees stopped shivering. He turned back to the cottage and Snape. You live in the middle of nowhere. Dazai broke the silence that had formed between them. Snape sighed, aggrieved. Hurry up and get inside. It's cold out here. You could live somewhere warmer. Dazai hummed as he skipped after Snape's retreating back. Pine needles cracked underfoot. He had to admit, it was cold. His slung-over coat did little to break the wind, so when Snape magically unlocked the cottage door with a wave of his hand, Desai didn't hesitate to clamber in behind him. It was instantly warmer inside, and the buzz of magic around them told Dazai there was probably some kind of heating charm. It felt familiar, the same one used in Lucius's mansion then. Dazai wondered silently and bitterly why the same spells couldn't be used in the Hogwarts dungeons. It was always freezing down there. Snape locked the door again. Now that they were inside, Dazai took a moment to look around Snape's home. On the near wall there was a bookcase filled mostly with potion textbooks. Dazai noticed a few fairy tales strewn in among them. There were also quite a few trinkets scattered across the shelves. A hand-carved wooden snake, an old wand holster, and a collection of truly atrocious coffee mugs among them. Beside it was a plush black sofa. A green quilt was thrown over one shoulder. In front of that, a stained coffee table, again smothered with a truly incredible number of ugly mugs. A couple potion books on the table looked to be particularly advanced. The fireplace wasn't lit. It was surprisingly homey. Somehow, juxtaposing the scene with Professor Snape felt wrong. You drink a lot of coffee. Dazai eyed a mug on the table. It read, Life begins after coffee. Snape's brow twitched. Those were gifts. Still, if you drink too much coffee, your heart will beat out of your chest and you'll die. Stop talking. Dazai mimed zipping his mouth shut. Snape waited a second for the quiet to settle, then said, Sit down on the couch. He pointed. I want to take a look at your eye. That's not necessary, Dazai told him, staying firmly by the door. It's all patched up. You'd probably only make it worse. We'll do this standing, if you don't sit down. Snape ignored him. Then, without waiting for an answer, left for the side hallway. Desai didn't know what was down there, but he did spy a kitchen through the other door. Maybe a bedroom. Desai watched him go, frowning. There wasn't any harm in Snape seeing the wound. Desai just felt squirmy even thinking about it. Except, of course. You can't use a healing spell on me, Dazai said the second Snape returned from wherever he'd gone. I'll get sick. Snape's head snapped to him, but his expression betrayed no surprise over this fact. So clearly he hadn't suddenly forgotten. What was the bother, then? Snape's eyes flicked to the sofa, then Dazai. Dazai huffed. You just want to look? He ambled to the couch, drawing out each step, purposefully slow. Snape is so creepy. He sat, and the couch pillow sunk underneath him. A cloud of dust plumed at the action, thick and gray. Dazai coughed and tried failingly to flap away the pollution. There was a tingle of magic on his skin, and suddenly the dust had cleared. Dazai's head whipped up to his professor. Snape held his wand aloft, pointed at the extinct dust cloud. When Dazai turned to him, he returned it somewhere within his robe. Evidently satisfied with that, he followed Dazai to the couch and dropped to his knees in front of it. He set a small plastic container on the coffee table beside him, whereupon the box pushed aside a layer of dust on the table Dazai hadn't noticed before. He crinkled his nose. This place is a mess. Don't you ever clean? In response, Snape indicated for Dazai to remove his bandages. With a huffy sigh, Dazai obliged. It unraveled around his head in several layers of wrapping and gauze. If it got infected from this, Dazai would be sure to tell Mori it was all Snape's fault. "I haven't been living here since classes began," Snape answered testily. "And if you keep questioning me, you'll wind up with detention for the rest of the semester." "That's not threatening at all," Dazai said, and Snape knew it. There was a sizable pile of cotton waste now gathering on the floor. It made an ugly mess, but Snape didn't seem bothered. Instead, he was all eyes on Dazai's slowly revealing face. It had Dazai's hands moving slower. He automatically drew out the reveal without any real thought on the matter. Meanwhile, Snape's waiting gaze never wavering. And when did Dazai finally reach the bottom layer? A wet piece of gauze slapped onto floor. Red. Snape sucked in a sharp breath, immediately leaning in to view the wound. Dazai couldn't see it himself, but he still got the gist. It was probably just as ugly as it had been the day Father died. A weeping wound, swollen and red, neatly done stitches courtesy of Mori, a dark, empty socket, though he kept it closed now. "Whoever did this to you, I'm going to—" Snape swallowed down the beginnings of a growling anger. Dazai half-lidded his remaining eye when the open air unexpectedly burned. Snape inspected the wound for over a minute, during which Dazai sat stiff as stone. He had to guess at Snape's thoughts. He couldn't read body language or facial expression when they were this close. His unseeing left eye helped not, either. After a second full minute had passed, Snape finally pulled away enough that Dazai could make out his face. Pale white, lips thin, brows pinched. By the time Dazai finished looking Snape over, the professor had snapped open the lid on his mysterious box. Dazai craned to make out what was inside. "A first aid kit?" Dazai asked, surprise obvious and genuine in his voice. He started to squint at the contents, but a lance of pain shot through his wound. He relaxed his expression instead, pondering, "What use does a wizard have for that? You lot have a spell for everything." Snape withdrew a cloth from his supplies, then turned back to Dazai. He winced upon seeing the wound again. "I'm going to clean the blood." He waited for Dazai's nod to begin. Snape began to carefully dab around the socket, dragging the cloth through a claggy substance in the crease of his eye. "The limits of magical healing are complex," Snape informed while he worked. He sounded calm in a way that was audibly practiced and sitting just over a growling anger. "More significant wounds still require bandaging." Dazai scrunched his eyes shut when Snape lightly patted over the goriest part. "Be careful," he chastised. The cloth lifted away upon protest. "You're going to make it worse," Snape sighed tiredly. "If I don't clean this, it will get infected. That will hurt more, I assure you." "Yeah, but at least your hands wouldn't be all over my face. You're going to poke my other eye out by mistake." Again, Snape pulled back. His hand and the cloth dropped unceremoniously into his lap. A strange and difficult-to-read expression was on his face when he tossed the now-red cloth into the waste pile. Then he pulled a roll of bandages out of his kit. Alongside it was a package of fresh gauze and medical tape. Of course, Snape didn't have the ointment Dazai was supposed to apply, but Mori wasn't here to yell at them for it, so that was fine. "I can do that," Dazai offered. He bent forward to take them, but Snape snatched them out of reach before he could. "Sit still," Snape told him. "I will do it." Dazai threw his arms up, exasperated. "You've been hanging out with Madame Pomfrey too much." Unexpectedly, Snape snorted at that. Dazai blinked, then a cheeky grin lit his face as well. But Snape's good humor was smothered a second later by, once again, a furrowed brow and pursed lips, like he'd just eaten something sour. Something pensive darkened his eyes. Dazai stilled automatically in response to the change, and thus managed to restrain a flinch when Snape began to tape the gauze in place. "Will you tell me how this happened?" This time Dazai did jump. Snape tisked and narrowly avoided poking open the line of stitches just under his socket. "Relax." Snape paused for a long moment before resuming his task. "However it may seem, those of us teaching at Hogwarts do want to help you. If you are being hurt at home, we have the resources to have you homed somewhere safer." Dazai considered his response for a moment. Snape seemed inclined to give the break to him, doing nothing but to continue wrapping Dazai's face. Only Dazai really didn't have anything more to say on this subject. Snape had made up his mind, and was entirely unshakable about it. It was annoying, and a dead end on all fronts. Besides, Snape was the type of person to just let things lie. Still, Dazai ought to at least attempt a cover-up story. I was mugged, Dazai told him after a moment. The lie sat embarrassingly on his tongue. Executives didn't get mugged. Still, he wasn't about to say that. Nor did he have any particular desire to draw attention onto Father, what with the man recently murdered and all. Snape's head snapped away from his work. His brows pinched and his eyes were calculating. He clicked his tongue. You were attacked on the street? Don't ask it like that, Dazai pouted. Snape doesn't believe me. How cruel. Snape ground his teeth, looking like he wanted either to bark something unsavory or eat his own words. Dazai wasn't sure which it was. Regardless, he then asked, and this. Attack. That's why you ran away? I wouldn't call it running away necessarily, just leaving without permission. You understand, boy, Snape continued, unperturbed, that this is hardly the first time I've been concerned for your home life. Whether this attack was random or not, you are clearly not safe in Yokohama. If Snape says so. I do, Snape stressed, to which Dazai stuck out his tongue childishly. I will ask outright then, because anything less appears to be of little use with you. Dazai, are you being abused at home? I can help you. Dazai couldn't help the stiffening of his spine, nor the frowning of his falsely cheerful face. He was always made uncomfortable, wrong-footed, by questions like that, and wasn't sure why. Perhaps it was a weakness. Something wrong in his blood. The thing that made him cold, always. The thing that made him still whenever Father spoke, or Mori's hand feathered over his injuries. It didn't really bear thinking about. He swallowed around a stone. When Snape finished wrapping the bandages, he leaned back to inspect his work before nodding. He asked, Do you have any other wounds? Dazai lifted a hand to his eye to feel. It had been cleaned and wrapped well, not quite to the level of Mori's work, but effective nonetheless. I don't, he said, not entirely honest. Thanks. You're welcome, Snape grunted, a critical eye still on Dazai. When we return to Hogwarts, Poppy will take another look at that. Understood? Understood, Dazai confirmed with a lazy mock salute. His eyes flicked to the pile of old bandages. The bloodied cloth stood out to him grotesquely. He cleared his throat. As for your concern, Dazai said, cherry-picking each word, I wouldn't worry over that kind of thing. I can take care of myself. Snape drew in a breath, and Dazai made himself meet the professor's eyes. Anyway, Dazai continued, drawling, you're greatly misinterpreting my situation. You're going to get yourself in trouble if you keep at this. But there's no convincing someone stubborn like Snape, is there? Snape's expression steeled. His confidence was strangely unwavering. I'm not giving up on you. Dazai smiled knowingly. Snape was playing a hopeless game, and so was he. You should... I can help. Don't... They stared at each other for a long moment, unblinking and knowing the other would never budge. It seemed their waltz may have ground to a standstill, Dazai thought. Apparently, Snape must have realized the same as well. He sighed again, just as heavy and tired. He ran a hand over his face, haggard. Fine. Tell me about the petrifications, then. Dazai blinked at the non-sequitur. The petrifications were done and over with, though he supposed Snape wouldn't know that. In his coat pocket, Riddle's diary suddenly felt heavy. He merely lifted a questioning brow. You know as much as I do. Snape leveled him with a wry stare. Really? I've been staying out of that mess. The truth, please, boy, Snape intoned. If we don't talk about your home situation, we talk about this. It is your choice. Dazai scowled. Despite Snape physically sitting beneath him, Dazai felt in no way were they on equal ground. Snape was definitely calling the shots. And rightly so, he supposed. They were in Snape's house anyhow. Still, Dazai didn't like being worked over. What do you want to know about the petrifications? Dazai asked, deciding his course. Snape nodded. He didn't look particularly pleased with that decision and, with a darkened expression, seemed to say, we aren't done talking about this, that Dazai disliked immensely. Tell me who your suspect is. Dazai's narrowing eyes were automatic. Suspicious. I don't know what you mean. Don't. Snape folded his arms. I already know you've been investigating, problem child. Just tell me what you know and I won't have you expelled for disobeying my direct orders to not get involved. He knew? How? Dazai even had Hell's hounds fooled into thinking he wasn't investigating the petrifications, and he knew that neither Draco nor Blaze would blab the secret. Which meant, Dazai mentally examined his list of leads. He'd spoken with Theodore but not explicitly about the petrifications. Luna, but again, he'd said nothing specific. Pansy wouldn't say anything if she knew it would land Draco in trouble. He suddenly blinked in realization. The witness, the mysterious person or persons, who witnessed the petrification of Colin Creevy. They must have overheard Dazai talking about it or seen something they shouldn't have. This witness was the only real unknown that day. They must have said something to Snape, but what else might they have heard or seen? Dazai kept his face blank, but internally he was waging war against his memories. Had he seen anyone following him? Had anyone acted strange around him? A curious thought tickled at the corner of his brain. Dazai shook it off. He would deal with that after returning to campus. But first, the best course of action to avoid suspicion on all fronts is… Snape is ruining all my fun, Dazai whined. But I guess the game is already over, anyway, so it's fine. Snape straightened abruptly. What did you do? Dazai tittered. I just mean that I've solved the mystery, so there's no more fun to be had. You're always seeing the worst in me. It's disheartening. A teacher shouldn't be like that. I am not playing games with you. Tell me what you know. Who is responsible? Dazai paused for half a second, just long enough to organize the lie in his head. Simple was best, Dazai had always thought. Tell only what you had to, and stick to the truth where possible. People's minds were their greatest enemies. If you gave them only the bare minimum information, they would reach their own conclusions. Whatever they were looking for, they would find. Dazai knew what Snape wanted. This lie was easy. He spread his fingers out alluringly, then, with the utmost confidence, declared, No one. Snape blinked. Then, annoyance prickled his mien. The truth, or, it is the truth, Dazai protested. No one is responsible for the petrifications. Snape's anger dropped. A blank seriousness replaced it. Explain. Dazai nodded, pleased. There's a basilisk living in the walls of the school. Snape's mouth snapped audibly shut. He stared at Dazai with a bewildered sort of countenance. Then, like the words were being ground out of him, asked, How do you know that? Dazai answered, His kernel of truth. I can feel it. He made a vague motion with his hand to indicate magical sensitivity, moving through the walls. And especially when it's petrifying someone. After that, it was just a matter of finding the right book in the library. I see. Snape trailed off. His face was twisted in consternation and disbelief. A basilisk is loose in the school. Wait. Snape shook his head, turning a glare onto Dazai at once. You're still hiding something, brat. There was a note left behind at the first scene. A basilisk alone couldn't have left that, he reasoned. So there is a human culprit. You're covering for them. Why? Hardly, Dazai scoffed. Everyone there hates me. I wouldn't hesitate to cast blame on someone like Pansy if I could. Unfortunately, I'm not feeling up to a frame job at the moment. Snape's brow twitched. Dazai hastened to continue. The message is unrelated. How so? Snape asked severely. Hook, line, and sinker once again. Snape is too easy. At least, Snape was easy when he wasn't trying to coddle Dazai over some imagined abuse case. Lockhart, Dazai answered simply, the lie coming quickly to him. This was the second time now he'd used Lockhart as an excuse, but the man was so unreliable it worked like a charm. Moreover, Dazai could recall seeing Lockhart in the vicinity of the first petrification, locking himself alone in a room. No alibi to confirm him. When Snape's eyes bugged in shock, then thinned with dark contemplation, Dazai explained, I only narrowly missed him at the scene. But when he saw Mrs. Norris, Lockhart took it as an opportunity for one of his stories. Snape glowered. He was clearly considering this turn of events. After a moment he grimly shook his head. You've confronted him about this. Dazai disagreed. You know how he is, making up conflicts to be the hero of. Is it really so surprising he would pretend this chamber of whatever was open? Just so he could solve it? Dazai flapped a hand. Anyway, he immediately blamed me for it, even when evidence said otherwise. Lockhart's just looking for another chapter in that book of his. I see, Snape said, and while Dazai could hear some hesitation in his tone, he could also tell Snape believed him, or at least was willing to try believing him, which was great, because Dazai was in no way going to name the actual culprit. Partly because it was his friend's sister, and partly because the truth pointed directly back to Port Mafia and Lucius. He's drumming up trouble so he can have me expelled, Dazai emphasized. He's an opportunist. The message is unrelated. Then, to further drive his point home, he added, Really? He's always trying to plan these things out. Earlier this year, he wrote me a script to follow, you know. I still have it if you want to read it. Though I imagine if you wait a year, Lockhart will just put the villainous overture he wrote me in that book of his. He's always prattling on about. Snape took that in silently for a long moment. After that he sighed, sounding haggard. He pinched the bridge of his nose bruisingly. Damn it, Gilderoy, he hissed under his breath, and Dazai knew he'd convinced him. Thinking this, Dazai playfully harumphed. What a waste. I solved the mystery and can't even do anything about it. What am I going to do about a giant snake, Maybe I'll just let myself get petrified. See what Lockhart does then. Do not even consider that, Snape snapped. Dazai raised his hands placatingly. And stop investigating problems that don't concern you. That's my job. As if. You were going the complete wrong direction, I bet. Snape bristled and Dazai grinned impishly. And this basilisk. You know where it is? I'd have to be at school for that, Dazai told him. And it would have to be kind of nearby. I don't know where it is most of the time. Snape hummed. He scratched his chin in thought. Then, with a grunt, he pushed to his feet. Dazai twitched at the sudden movement. Thank you for telling me now, Snape said. Though in the future, tell me earlier when you solve one of your mysteries. Albus may have been able to put a stop to the petrifications much earlier had he known. Sorry for overestimating you, sir. Snape's lip twitched. Expected attention when we returned to school. I told you explicitly not to look into this. Dazai blew a raspberry that Snape raised a brow at. Snape sighed. He patted his robes down free of dust. Apparently, he was done with the interrogation. Dazai silently preened at his success. I'll make us dinner, Snape said at last, exhaustion and muted anger evident in his voice. You get comfortable. And do not snoop around my things, problem child. Dazai lifted his hands as if to say, Who, me? Looking terribly suspicious, Snape retreated to the kitchen. Once he was alone, Dazai shimmied further into the corner of the couch. He threw the blanket over his lap snugly. It was warm in Snape's home, and Dazai didn't mind the blanket's pressure, even with Mori's coat still hanging over his shoulders. He sat stiffly underneath. Only every so often did his fingers twitch to untie a loose thread. He could hear Snape fussing about in the kitchen, the opening and closing of cupboards and the grunt of a man looking for food in a house that hadn't been occupied in months. Dazai listened to it all grim. Dazai sighed. Perhaps there was a cleaner path out of Snape's insistent questioning, and he was just too attached to Hell's hounds to see it. Too unwilling to make hard decision that would lose him his gang. Mori would be chastising him, right now. Snape was busy scrounging for food. Abuse. There's no way something like that could ever apply to me. Snape just doesn't understand how it is. At least he'd temporarily drop the conversation. Dazai could only put up with so much for so long. Disliking the thought, Dazai looked around for a distraction. The coffee mugs were, he supposed, interesting, but he could hardly break them apart, then glue them back together again. It would be an entertaining puzzle, but Dazai didn't know if Snape had glue. Also, he would certainly wind up with another detention, even if breaking some of these would certainly be doing the man a favor. Or he could break them, use the shards to slice open a vein. To get blood on Snape's floor, though. I can't adult today, a mug told him. Dazai pretended not to have seen it. His eyes landed on the potion textbooks instead. It was long, definitely high level, well beyond the level he could find in the Hogwarts library. And honestly, Dazai had never really given potion-making much thought. Surely he would have something to learn that would keep his mind occupied while Snape tried to find food. Thinking this, Dazai grabbed one of the books off the table. He pushed back into the sofa, got comfortable, and began reading. By the time Snape had pulled together honeyed tea and 2 bowls of canned soup, Dazai was already a quarter way through the first book. He didn't want to set it down when Snape came back, but the bowl was set in front of him on the table, and Snape stared at him pointedly until he moved. The mug Snape set in front of him had a drawing of a hungry cobra snake on it and read, "Got rats?" Dazai closed the book and set it beside him. He remembered his page to pick back up later. Who knew potions were actually interesting? Once you got past all the watered-down crap they put in school textbooks, that was. But this higher-level text actually seemed to hold some meaning. He told Snape as much. "Eat," the professor droned. Dazai sniffed. "Snape is trying to poison me? I hope it's not the painful kind." Snape made a face like he was about to object, but stuttered to a stop when, despite his protests, Dazai at once started to eat. The soup was still steaming when he pulled it into his lap, careful not to spill on the sofa. He blew on it with a whistle. A cloud of steam wafted across the table, where Snape was gruntingly lowering himself to the floor again. Dazai waited for his soup to cool. He raised a brow. "Don't you have anywhere to sit?" Snape shot him a look. Then he shoved a scalding spoonful of chicken soup into his mouth before it cooled. His face twisted painfully a second later, and he had to take several wheezing breaths to keep from burning his tongue. Dazai laughed. "Don't," he coughed, and Dazai laughed harder. "Don't ask questions." Dazai rolled his eye at the familiar command. He made a show of blowing on his soup again. The smell of chicken broth and corn wafted lazily around them. "Fine then. The floor must be really comfortable, Snape, sir, for you to always be sitting on it." Snape clicked his tongue, then winced when the burned appendage must have stung. "Brat," he spat. When Dazai only responded by snorting again, he ground out, "I do not often have guests. 1 couch is satisfactory for me." Dazai hummed. He looked around the room again, and despite the dozens of coffee mugs and books, Snape's answer seemed to ring true. 1 sofa, 1 hanger on the coat rack, 1 blanket. Snape definitely lived alone, and he didn't seem to ever want guests either. Dazai couldn't relate. Yokohama was a bustling city, and Port Mafia's headquarters was its epicenter. There wasn't a quiet day there, nor an empty room. "You don't have a dining table," Dazai commented. "I do," Snape indicated towards the kitchen with his chin. "And you still sit on the floor?" "Snape is so weird." "I'm keeping an eye on you, problem child," Snape said, eyes daggers. "And I was right to. I'm gone for 10 minutes and you've already raided my shelf. Actually, this one was on the table." Dazai stirred his soup in a slow, circular motion. A meaty chunk of chicken sunk to the bottom. He tried to pierce it with the spoon, but misjudged the distance and clanked the bottom of the bowl instead. "Anyway, shouldn't you be appreciative that I'm reading? That's practically schoolwork." "It's not," Snape argued. He braved another spoonful of soup. This time he chewed and swallowed without making a funny face, and Dazai sighed. Snape shot him a knowing glare. Dazai wasn't really hungry, but he was sure the potion master would make a fuss if he didn't eat anything. Snape and Pomfrey were close after all. Dazai stirred his soup like it was a potion in the making for several long seconds before finally bracing himself to eat some. He spooned out some broth and drank it. Salt and warmth bloomed across his taste buds. Deeming it not terribly stomach-curdling, he scooped out a bit more. He drank a few tablespoons worth of broth when the silence suddenly dawned on him. Dazai curiously looked up from his soup. From the other side of the table, Snape was watching him strangely. "What?" Dazai asked. Snape's blank expression frowned. "Nothing," he said. "Eat as much as you can. Healing wounds need energy." "Obviously." Dazai pointed his spoon mockingly at Snape. A splash of warmed broth splattered across the table. "But it's hardly my fault if you only have years-old soup in here. This is no good. I'll probably get sick." As an afterthought, he added a longing. "Or maybe I'll die." Snape's lip curled around his spoon. He dropped it in his bowl, clinking, and said, "It's hardly that old. And if you're going to be sick, do it in the bathroom." "Yes, sir." "I'll plan out my vomiting accordingly," Dazai drawled, twirling his spoon around. Snape paused before taking another bite, expression drawing up with disgust at Dazai's less than appetizing response. Just eat. Brat. Desai stuck his tongue out, but did in fact eat another spoonful. He bit into a kernel of corn, and it popped under his sharpest tooth. Another long moment passed in near silence. The clinking of metal spoons in plastic bowls was the only conversation between them. At once, Dazai was suddenly aware that he and Snape had hardly spent this much time together. Not without explicit reason. Usually between them, once Snape was done interrogating him, Dazai would always be free to go. But not today. Today the interrogation was over, but they were both still here. And while their magic lessons were also quite long, they followed a similar trend. It was all business, and then Dazai got to leave. He liked the getting to leave part. Now, an awkward air had settled between them. In all honesty, Dazai didn't mind the silence. Snape was less annoying when he wasn't talking after all. But that didn't lessen the feeling that, probably, there was something he was supposed to be doing. Something to say, or an action to take. Dazai took another look around the room, and thought it was probably because this was Snape's house. They didn't have the relatively equal ground of Hogwarts. Even though Snape had invited him, Dazai felt a little like he was intruding. It had his skin prickling. "Finish your soup," Snape said suddenly, interrupting Dazai's wandering thoughts. He was watching the executive with a watching gaze. Dazai glanced down at his bowl. It was about half empty, though he'd really only drank the broth and nibbled a few pieces of chicken. But now, a heavy weight had settled in his stomach. Dazai said, "I'll really throw up if I keep going. Don't tell me Snape actually wanted that." Snape's lip curled, offended. "Don't make a mess on my floor." Smirking, Dazai relented his bowl to the table. Snape eyed the bowl with a critical stare. "You didn't eat much," Snape said slowly. Dazai grabbed his tea from the table instead of responding. It still had a small curl of steam coming over it, but wasn't hot to the touch. He took a tentative sip. "Mr. Dazai, I'm not so hungry," Dazai huffed, burying his nose in the tea. Sweetness lingered on his tongue. He took another sip. "Don't make that face. You're starting to look like Blaze when I skip breakfast." Snape's face pinched. "You skip... Ugh. Now you sound like him too. Stop interrupting me," he snapped suddenly. Dazai's mouth clamped shut, and he barely restrained the instinctive flinch that fought to rack through him. "My bad," he said, voice carefully not tight. Snape blinked. Briefly, something apologetic flickered across his face. It was gone as soon as it arrived, however, and Dazai could only guess at its meaning. When he next spoke, Snape's voice was very level. "You shouldn't skip meals. You're thin enough, as is." Dazai hummed into his tea. His fingers itched to pick at something, but the mug kept them occupied. He settled for tapping out a familiar beat instead, something he'd heard distantly playing at the Malfoy winter ball. The ceramic clicked under his nails. Snape met his wandering stare. "Sorry," he said, "for raising my voice." Dazai was quick to speak over him. "You said, 'Eat as much as I can,'" he recited petulantly. Snape paused, watching him, then sighed. After a second, he put his own bowl down beside Dazai's. It was nearly empty, save for where Snape had pushed about a dozen carrot pieces into the side, uneaten. He also grabbed his tea. This time, he made sure to blow on it several times before drinking from his world's okayest professor mug. When it didn't burn him, he drew out a tired breath. "I suppose I did." Satisfied, Dazai sipped on his tea. It went down easier than the soup had. Hoping for a distraction from Snape's stare, Dazai asked, "So, what do you do around here for fun?" Snape blinked. "I mean," he continued, looking around the room again pointedly. Aside from the books and the mess that needed cleaning, there wasn't much to do here. He was personally familiar with spending hours and hours alone in a room with nothing to do. Just barking dogs for company, and nothing to do with his hands except to twist and pull at his fingers. But Snape was hardly in the same situation. Surely the potion master must do something entertaining with his free time. And now, stuck in this strange cottage alone with a man, Dazai itched for a distraction. He skimmed over the books, which were apparently off-limits, and the coffee mugs. There really wasn't anything to do. "Oh." Dazai stood up so suddenly that Snape startled, and his tea splashed dangerously close to spilling. "So what are you doing?" "Sit down," Snape told him snappishly. You've got cards, Dazai cheered, not at all sitting back down. He reached for them where they were hidden by a checkered mug. He missed them by a few inches. Depth perception shot to all hell, but he covered the flub up by pretending to swipe away some dust. Then he whirled back on Snape. Let's play. Snape blinked at him, looking bewildered with Dazai's sudden chipperness. He shook his head and sighed. Don't just go snooping around my things, brat. And you can play cards after you eat more soup. I'll be sick, Dazai protested again as he returned to the sofa. He proceeded to ignore Snape's request and unpacked the cards anyway. He set his mug down on the table in such a way that the cartoon snake was facing away from him. Come on, play around with me. At least eat a few more spoonfuls, Snape argued. Dazai made a face. His eyes flicked between the cards and the soup in contemplation. Then the solution dawned on him. If you win, I'll have some more. Upon realizing what Dazai meant, his expression hardened into a scowl. I'm not gambling your eating habits. Dazai ignored him and shuffled the deck. He rifled the deck with bent thumbs, cascaded the cards, then did it thrice more. Even with half his vision gone, these tricks were easy. All muscle memory. The rhythmic shuff-shuff-shoof of cards had Snape's house sounding like a casino hall. Snape watched Dazai's practiced hands, but looked to his face when Dazai said, Sure you will. I want to play 5-card draw. While Snape wasn't looking, Dazai folded the cards together one more time. His hands searchingly cascaded the deck. Snape clicked his tongue. Do you want detention? He asked sardonically. Dazai shrugged and dealt the cards. 5 to him, and 5 to Snape. They didn't have a third person to deal, so he simply set the stack between them instead. He bent the cards up to see what his hand was, nothing worth. Betting on, then looked to Snape to do the same. For a moment, all Snape did was stare at him. You're supposed to look at your cards now. His brow twitched. I know how to play, Dazai nodded, expectant, and Snape huffed. Finally, and with more agitation than strictly necessary, Snape snatched his cards off the table. When he saw them, his sneer deepened. Dazai snorted. A bad hand, then. They both had rotten luck. There you go, Dazai said, clapping. Snape's eye shot to him glaringly. If you win, I'll get a detention. If I win, we aren't betting anything. But that's where the fun is. Where is Snape's enjoyment going to come from if he isn't threatening to make students clean cauldrons for an hour, Don't be a brat. I hardly need your permission to assign detentions. Dazai nodded and fingered his cards. Fine, I'll have some soup if you win. Snape is such a stickler. Snape paused, either considering that or about to fly off the handle. If I win, Dazai rubbed his chin in thought. What did he want from Snape? I said we're not betting anything. I am not gambling with a child. Obviously we're gambling, Dazai said. If I win, I want one of your ugly coffee mugs. Snape blinked several times. His annoyance melted away into bemusement. You want a mug? Sure. So I can make myself tea at school, Dazai beamed, eyes already searching around the table and shelf for one he particularly liked. They were all really awful. Bright colors, flashy designs, and kitschy sayings that had Dazai cringing. That's hardly something you can object to. It's not like we're betting anything serious. I see, Snape said. Without saying anything more, Snape set his cards on the table and slid 2 of them into a pile. Then, he took 2 new cards off of the original stack. Snape's new hand had the corners of his eyes pinching satisfactorily. Dazai's grin was splitting. You're playing! Snape's lips twitched upwards for half a second. I am. Draw you cards, problem child. Yes, sir. Dazai energetically swapped out 3 of his cards. He also smiled, more due to amusement than having drawn a good hand. He'd managed 1 pair of 2s, and nothing more. Certainly Snape's hand was better, and would be winning the game. A terrible and dramatic defeat. Snape's hidden smile belied his win. How terrible for the man, then, that he'd let Dazai do the shuffling. Snape sorted his cards, then laid them down in a precise order. A 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. All of varying suits. He'd pulled a straight. I expect at least 2 bites of soup, he told Dazai. So confident, Dazai nodded approvingly. Then with a sweetened smile, He laid down his own hand. 4 tens. Snape sputtered. You won! Dazai laughed loudly. The boisterous movement hid how he slipped his original hand into the sleeve of his shirt. Naturally, he'd swiped some of the more impressive cards out of the deck while shuffling. It wasn't like Snape had noticed. So did it really count as cheating? Dazai had plucked out the queens, one of the kings, one of the jacks, and 2 of the aces. And, of course, all 4 tens. The deck was considerably thinned, and Dazai was actually a little surprised Snape hadn't called him on it. I usually have such bad luck, Dazai said while preening. What a surprise. I'm sure it won't happen again. Snape swiped their cards off the table, fussed with them for a moment, then redealt them. Dazai leaned into the palm of his hand, smiling. Again? You seemed like you didn't want to play before. Or maybe Snape is just a sore loser. Detention. Sure, if you win. Dazai pretended to look at his cards. Under his sleeve he was readying a royal flush. I'm taking that mug, by the way. He indicated to the tea now cooling at Snape's side. Snape faltered with his cards, blinkingly looking to his mug. Then Dazai. World's okayest professor, he read aloud, trailing. His brows now furrowed in confusion rather than irritation. Why? Dazai merely shrugged. I like that one best, he said simply. But I've already won it, and I really don't want 2 mugs. So if I win this time, I want your book. He patted the potions textbook beside him in point. Again, the professor looked somewhat befuddled with Dazai's command. He quickly shook it off and glared instead. I'm hardly giving you my things. Not giving. Losing. I have to win fair and square. It's hardly my fault if you lose. Dazai slotted an ace in the bandages on his wrist. They held a silent staring contest for several long moments. Snape, glaring. Dazai, cheerful. At last, Snape relented with a huffy sigh. Fine. You can have that book if you win. If not, you eat all your soup, and do all your homework for the month. Dazai could have laughed. Snape was too easy. But he didn't. Instead, he made a show of peeking at his cards again. Dazai set them back down. Then he gestured to the deck, indicating that they should draw again before confirming the new bet. Snape agreed with a grunt. He traded in only one of his cards. Dazai pretended to hem and haw over it for a few dragging seconds. Only then did he pick 2 random cards to redraw. The cards themselves didn't really matter. The secret hand within his sleeve did, and it had already won him this game. Sharing a confirming look, both players revealed their hands. Snape laid down a flush. Dazai flicked his wrist, and the garbage hand he'd been collecting replaced itself with the royal flush. He flared his hands out, showy. The cards were revealed in a triumphant throw between them. Snape's mouth dropped open. He leaned forward to squint at Dazai's hands, as if not really believing they could be there. His eyes flicked rapidly between Dazai and the cards. Meanwhile, Dazai was clapping. I won again. Hey, what are the odds? Almost impossibly low, was the answer. Of course, he didn't say this aloud. Snape stared. Now Dazai did laugh. In fact, he laughed so hard that he snorted. All the while, Snape stared at him, bewildered and shocked. It took several seconds to shake himself from his stupor. When he did, he was scowling. How are you doing that? What? Winning, Snape glowered. That hand was too good, Dazai gasped, hand flying to his chest. What are you accusing me of? Cheating, Snape said dully, as if Snape actually saw me do anything. He's just guessing, right? Dazai sniffed. What a sore loser. I can't believe you're my favorite professor. Snape blinked, looking a little stupefied. Favorite. If I'm your favorite, you should participate in class. I make poisons every class. Potions, Snape corrected. You should be making potions every class. Dazai waved him off, like it was the same thing. With the other hand, he took all the cards off the table and made work of shuffling them again. An intentional flick of his wrist had the stolen cards return to their port. He folded them again, precise. Then he dealt them cards 5 each. Snape watched him for a moment longer, blatantly suspicious and watching Dazai's hands for any sign of underhanded tricks. He wouldn't find any. Not this time. When he finally tore his eyes from Dazai to look at his cards, his eyes widened minutely. Dazai hid a smirk behind a sip of honeyed tea. This time, his clever hands had given Snape the win. He asked Snape if he was going to draw, and Snape shook his head. Dazai traded 3 of his cards just to see what he would get. He laid down a pair of 8s. Bah, you think I can win with this? No, Snape said, sounding somewhat skeptical despite it. He flipped his cards to reveal his full house. 2 kings and 3 4s. I win. See? Snape has some luck too, Dazai said. No need to blame me for everything. In truth, he'd picked a few cards from the deck and sorted them on top. All it had taken after that was dealing their hands out in a certain order. But judging by Snape's narrowed eyes, the man still didn't quite believe there wasn't more than chance at play. Probably Desai was being too flashy with so many high-scoring, low-chance hands. But he wasn't trying to be subtle. He was just having fun, passing time, distracting Snape. Dazai waved a solitary ace. Snape looked between his cards and Dazai's skeptically. He blinked, like he suddenly remembered something. His head snapped to meet Dazai's eyes. Eat your soup. Huh? No way. Snape's lip curled. I won. What happened to winning fair and square? Sure you won. But we didn't bet this round. Dazai beamed, and Snape's teeth ground together painfully. Could it be? Is Snape a sore winner, too? You... Snape stop-started. Annoyance and frustration turned his face a tomato kind of red. Brat, he finished sharply. You did that on purpose. Dazai chuckled. You've got no sportsmanship, he accused teasingly. He collected the cards again and started another shuffle. Another round? No, Snape said, annoyance clearly still peppering his expression. Dazai thought to laugh at him but pouted instead. It's getting late. Oh, is that the only reason? Dazai bantered. He tapped his nails noisily on the potion textbook as a reminder of what Snape had lost. Snape's left eye twitched. Enough. Dazai set the cards down, placating. It's late, and we have an early train to catch tomorrow, he reiterated. You can borrow some of my pajamas to sleep in. I don't have a spare room, so you'll be comfortable on the couch. Understood? Understood. That was well and good. Dazai had certainly slept in worse places than a dusty couch, although he was actually more concerned with... a change of clothes? He made a face. I'm fine in this. Snape raised a brow. I'm uncomfortable just looking at you. His eyes roved over Dazai's tight tie, his stiff coat, his belted slacks. You won't be able to sleep in that. I'll figure it out, Dazai said. He doubted he'd manage sleep regardless. There's no need. This is easier. Dazai wanted to protest again, but felt there was no point in it. Not when Snape was already rising to his feet with a grunt and collecting their cold or empty bowls from the table. He levitated their dishes to the kitchen with a muttered spell. Once the table was cleared, Snape nodded to himself. He turned to what was presumably the bedroom, but just before leaving his eyes flicked to the card deck. Dazai followed his gaze, curious. He'd left the ace of hearts on top. Snape sighed, loudly. Keep the cards, they must be cursed. Dazai blinked several times, sure he must have heard incorrectly. The words hung in the air, unanswered, for another few seconds longer. Then Dazai burst out in exhilarated laughter. Snape's lips curled into a smile. Small and fond, Dazai warmed to share it. Later that night, in the thick of a shadowed forest's midnight, Dazai lied on Snape's couch sleepless. He stared up at the ceiling. There was a cup of tea beside him that the professor had charmed to stay warm through the night. If Dazai was careful with his fingers, it would stay steaming until the morning finally arrived. Snape's pajamas were too big on him. They hung off his frame. Dazai felt a bit like a skeleton in them. He'd kept Mori's coat on his shoulders and felt more like a corpse still. The unfamiliarity of the whole situation, the low ceiling, the honey tea, the comfortable clothes, kept Dazai's mind alight with swirling thoughts. He shuffled the cards with one hand, knifed his index finger in the other, only saw half the ceiling with his good eye. Unwelcome, Dazai's mind returned to Yokohama, to his stiff bed, or the dog kennel, the red lamp in his room, the secret compartment in his desk filled with broken razor blades, comfortable, sleepless, unreconcilable. Instead of dreaming, Dazai dealt himself a royal flush. Chapter 22. Poppy. On the train to Hogwarts, Dazai talked Snape's ear off about potions. It kept the professor from asking unwanted questions or from staring too long in that contemplative silence Dazai really wasn't liking. The only stares he received this way were ones of stupefaction. When the train finally rolled into its final destination, Snape blinkingly said, "You're actually reading that book? You understand it?" His eyes narrowed on the hard-won textbook in Dazai's lap. Sitting atop it was his world's okayest professor mug and a deck of cards. Also in Dazai's lap was a worn pair of too large pajamas. They were Snape's, but the professor had told him to keep them. "I'm not doing your laundry," Snape had told him pointedly. "Save me the trouble and take those with you." And while they were officially the most comfortable thing Dazai owned, he doubted he'd ever wear them again. Mori was in charge of buying Dazai's clothes after all, and the boss had different tastes. Mori's coat hung thickly over his shoulders in point. Dazai shrugged. "It's pretty straightforward," he said, which wasn't a lie. Potions were more interesting than Dazai had originally thought, actually. Ingredients weren't added at random, and nothing about the process was arbitrary. Every addition to the cauldron was perfectly calculated. Beozar balanced out Frog's tongue. Stirring thrice activated the intrinsic magical properties of starlight, while stirring twice only changed its color. Dazai was starting to really appreciate the logical calculation that went into potion making. Math and chemistry, not feelings and sensations. Much more to the point, he thought. Snape hummed, tone indiscernible. He turned an assessing eye onto Dazai, like he was once again not quite believing what he was seeing. Dazai was getting somewhat used to that look, but that didn't change the fact it always left him feeling like he'd said something he shouldn't. Still, Snape walked Dazai down the train without objection. Dazai clutched his new belongings to his chest to keep from dropping them. Luckily, there weren't many people on board. The students were still on break for some time yet, and the other passengers gave them a wide berth upon identifying the demon student. Mostly, only train staff was present today. Just as they hopped off the train and into the station, Dazai heard a staff member comment, "Have you found it yet? The monster from the other day? I'm petrified I might find it every time I open a compartment." "No. Thank Merlin, I think it flew away. At least none of the passengers have seen it since." "Think we'd lose our jobs if a wild monster was aboard all this time? I heard it was only a pixie, really. I thought it was a fire salamander bat." "Hey, what in Merlin's name are you talking about?" Snape's eyes flicked to them, bewilderment flashing across his face. Dazai tugged on his sleeve. He physically tore Snape away from that conversation. In no way did he want to talk about Egg's second escapade right now. "Hey, if a cauldron was lined with copper, would that have any impact on the potency of a pepera potion?" Dazai bounced around Snape's side to ask, effectively blocking the train staff from view. "Because..." Snape side-eyed him. The confusion modeling his face dropped into something dry. "With all these questions, I'm to assume you'll be passing my next test, boy." Dazai's mouth snapped shut. Snape watched him for a moment longer. When he looked away, there was a small upwards curve on his lips. "But if you ask me the same question in class, I may be inclined to answer," Dazai chuckled. They walked mostly in silence to Hogwarts. The path was quiet today, as no other students took the path alongside them. Seeing as there were no Thestrals waiting for them, Snape and Dazai had to walk the whole way themselves. It wasn't particularly long, though magical dead horses certainly would have made faster work of it. Dazai didn't mind, mostly. It only bothered him that Snape kept shooting his not-so-surreptitious glances while they walked. For his part, Snape seemed to be walking fast on purpose. Apparently, he had somewhere to be. Meanwhile, Dazai was only planning to change into his school robes and visit the library. Some research to start off his second semester, though perhaps starting with his interrogation of Tom Riddle should come first, in which case the privacy of his office would do better. The school's massive doors swung open of their own accord. The heightened amount of magic inhabiting Hogwarts immediately tickled Dazai, but within a few seconds it quieted down into something more familiar. A quiet pressure. Habitual. Dazai easily shrugged it off. They walked inside, and the door shut itself behind them. Snape let out a long sigh upon entering. His shoulders melted, and Dazai suddenly realized how much stress the man had been carrying since the party. His face relaxed minutely, but there was still a characteristic tension in his jaw. Right. In no way did Dazai want to trip into another interrogation with Snape right now. Certainly not when he was making an expression like that. Dazai was about to excuse himself to the office when someone called out to them. "Severus, Professor McGonagall started. Immediately upon seeing Dazai at his side, however, she stilled. For a second, confusion lit her expression when she saw the mug and book in his hands. But it was quickly replaced with shock paling her face. She gaped at his bandages and eye bags. She looked hastily to Snape for explanation. What happened? Snape shook his head gravely. Later, he said. McGonagall, clearly displeased at being ignored, leveled her co-worker with a glare. Is Poppy back yet? He asked instead. McGonagall's lips pursed. Her gaze briefly flicked to Desai, then back, apparently reading Snape's intentions. Not yet. I thought she was the one going to get him. Dazai startled. What? What did McGonagall mean? He hadn't seen Pomfrey at the Malfoy ball, only Snape. And further, Snape had done nothing to indicate Pomfrey's presence at the house yesterday. She wasn't at the party, but she was looking for him. That only left one conclusion. But Dazai's eyes narrowed. McGonagall couldn't be talking about Poppy going to Yokohama. Could she? I see. Gilderoy? Dazai forced himself out of his thoughts. There was no changing Poppy's whereabouts now. He'd have to send Mori a letter later, though, inquiring about the matron's possible activities. Likely, she would just be turned away at the city's borders. But Dazai was an executive now. He should at least attempt due diligence. No, she crossed her arms. Severus, what is going on? Why is he here and not at St. Mungo's where he so clearly needs to be? Snape's lip curled into something like disgust. Dazai raised a curious brow at the expression. I don't trust them, he spat. Severus, he obviously needs medical attention. McGonagall took a step forward. Worry and irritation peppered her expression. I've looked at it myself. It is... He trailed off, swallowing thickly. Then, there's no emergency that cannot wait for Poppy's return. Here, Snape leveled McGonagall with a significant look. And I would rather not be having this particular conversation out here where anyone could bother us. McGonagall paused, and apparently couldn't refute that point. After a moment, she nodded grimly. We'll talk. She cast another stressed gaze onto Dazai. In my office. Snape nodded. He took several steps towards McGonagall, intending to leave now. Instinctively, Dazai made to follow. Get settled in, problem child. Snape stopped him. I will handle this. If you're going to be talking about me, I want to come with. Snape turned up a brow. I was under the impression you didn't want to talk about your home life. I'll only be listening. Very polite and quiet, Snape snorted. So I can hear you make things up about me. Immediately, Snape made a face at that. He apparently wasn't believing Dazai's "you've greatly misinterpreted my home life" testimony. Dazai hadn't really expected him to. It was fine. Snape sighed. You have had a long few days, Snape told him. Relax. Let us handle this now. Dazai watched him for a long moment with a passive expression, hoping to give off the impression that Snape was hardly the boss of him and he'd be doing whatever he wanted, regardless of permissions. But given that Snape was scowling about 70% of the time. Anyway, it was hard to tell if he got the message. He shrugged. Dazai supposed it didn't really matter anyway. More time to bother Riddle. Less time to fuss over Snape's inane pet project. That was likely for the best. He'd maybe kill himself if he had to hear Snape worry over his well-being again. Bleg. Anyway, it wasn't like Snape could really get in his way. Yokohama was impenetrable as always. Snape was welcome to try bashing his head against that particular wall if he really wanted. Settled, Dazai relented. Fine, he huffed. You're so annoying, sir. Snape clicked his tongue. Detention tomorrow. Yeah. Snape made a face that wasn't exactly disgruntled. Dazai wiggled his fingers menacingly. Meanwhile, McGonagall was looking between the two of them, expression thoughtful. She cleared her throat. They stopped bickering immediately. Severus, she reminded him with a stern tone. Snape blinked, then nodded. Right. He took another step to McGonagall's side, ready to leave. But first, he cast a final glance back to Dazai. "Stay out of trouble. Do not look for the basilisk." McGonagall choked on her spit. "Basilisk? I'm on my best behavior," Dazai responded. "Chipper." Snape sighed, sounding deeply aggrieved. "That's what I'm afraid of." And with that, a stoic Snape and a bewildered McGonagall left down the hall. Dazai let out his breath once they were gone. His shoulders fell, no longer the stiff line they'd drawn up into. Whatever cheerfulness had found itself on his face melted away without an audience. Dazai stood in the empty atrium for several long moments. It was dark at his back where a closed door blotted the sun out. Back at Hogwarts again. He'd thought it might make him feel better to be back here, but all Dazai felt now was tired. He wondered what Mori thought about this turn of events, if he approved of Dazai letting Snape take him back here, or if the boss would have preferred he just kill Snape outright. But Dazai had filtered through the options and, yes, this was the right decision. He was sure of it. Absent-mindedly, Dazai's nails had found their place at his wrist, scratching. He had all his ducks in a row, surely. Gang members all kept at an arm's length, save for Blaze and Draco, who had more use to him. Snape was a different kind of problem, but he was also never going to make headway on his concerns, so that was fine. Probably, certainly, he wouldn't let it. The atrium was massive, taller than anything had a right to be, really. It was fancy stonework and red bricks in a staggered pattern. A chandelier, too high above to really see, was lit even in the middle of the day. So towering and extravagant, Dazai imagined it collapsing on him, suffocating every last breath out of him. Bricks crushing his bones, his lungs deflated, something sticky clogged his nail. Drat! Dazai hastily pulled his hand away from his wrist. The cuts there were new enough to tear open, and there Dazai had gone, letting his thoughts wander and scratching mindlessly at the wounds until they reopened. Small blots of red changed the color of his bandages. He clicked his tongue. Dazai took the hall to his left upon realizing this. Standing still would do him no good. He'd look for the office right now, draft a letter to Mori requesting instruction, if any were available. Then he'd question Riddle about the Chamber of Secrets. Although, this was all much easier said than done. Because the instant Dazai arrived at the top of a spiral staircase, his surroundings were no longer familiar, and he was lost. Of course. Dazai slumped, utterly defeated. Even though it had only been a short while, he'd readjusted to life in Yokohama swiftly. Living in a building he understood, even for just a few days. What a luxury. Now he was going to wander ever-changing halls until he got lucky or died. He passed several familiar and unfamiliar paintings and ignored them. They wouldn't help at all. Most of the paintings were scared of him, and when they did give advice, it was so illogical as to be impossible to follow. Generally, Dazai's feet could find their way to the library wherever he was, an automatic process guiding him there thoughtlessly. Hopefully, today would be no different. At least then he would have a sense of, "Just around here, I think." Dazai perked up. He knew that voice. "So it says. But isn't it too early?" Excited, Dazai's pace quickened until he was coming around a nearby corner. Immediately, Fred and George Weasley came into view. They were each wearing one of those infamous Weasley Christmas sweaters. Though, squinting, Dazai realized they had swapped each other. The F was on George's sweater, while the G was on Fred's. They were standing hunched over the Marauders' map, tracking something with their eyes and fingers. When Dazai turned the corner and bounded over to them, their eyes snapped up. "Dazai!" Fred chirped. "We just saw your name and were coming to find—" He cut off with a ragged, shocked breath. Beside him, George made a choking sound. They were staring at his bandaged eye. "It's a good thing you two were looking." "I'm lost again, would you believe?" Dazai told them, pointedly ignoring their searching gazes. He should have expected this, had to some extent, but also very much did not understand what the fuss was about. Last time he'd worn an eye patch, over a year ago now, and before his time at Hogwarts, no one had given him a second glance. Bother. Still, the wound was ugly, and it did hurt something awful. Dazai hated pain, but he also had a tolerance for it, so that was saying something. but it was astounding how shocked people could be about such an injury. His eye had been there, and now it wasn't. Dazai had catalogued the wound as just another thing that was empty about him, a fact of nature. But Snape and Draco and Blaze, they had just kept looking at it, like it was something grave and unimaginable. Desai wanted to hear no more of it, but judging by how the twins rushed to him, he didn't think they'd let him off so easy. Drat again, Dazai thought bitterly. He pasted a smile on regardless. He really was relieved to see them. George hesitated just shy of cupping his cheek. Fred hovered nervously at his side. It was unusual to see them so uncertain, and Dazai tensed up automatically. He made a gesture like shaking them off, but the twins were hardly deterred. "What happened?" Fred said. His voice was strangely low, pointed. Dazai was getting really sick of hearing that question. "I'm trying out a more villainous look," he joked, and lifted an arm to indicate his new coat as well. The long black silhouette only made him appear more menacing. "It'll give those nerds at the Daily Prophet something to write about." Fred and George shared one of their looks. "Dazai, I love jokes as much as the next guy, but grievous wounds on my little brother are not even remotely funny," George said haltingly. He leaned in to see the gauze. When he pulled back, there was a sour look on his face like he'd decided something. "Please don't joke about the massive bundle of bandages on your face that wasn't there a week ago." "Serious time now, Snakey," Fred agreed, tone low. "What happened?" Dazai glowered. "I've already gotten an earful from Snape about this. Let it go." "Not possible," they said at the same time. "Damn." Dazai tried a pout next. Puppy dog eyes and everything. "Tell us what happened," George said, and Fred finished. "I promise, we'll make whoever did that, regret it." "What?" Dazai asked, laughing a little despite himself. "You'd commit a murder for me?" "Yes," they said immediately. Dazai blinked, utterly bewildered. He took a step back. There's no need for that." And while the twins looked briefly guilty, they didn't relent. They wore the most serious looks Dazai had ever seen on them before. Even in the thick of danger last year with the guards, they hadn't looked so severe. Dazai felt a trill of trepidation run up his spine. He forcefully smothered it. Still, the twins had always been good at reading him. A second later, George stepped back to give Dazai some breathing space. He nudged his brother, and Fred reluctantly pulled away as well. Dazai spoke before they could get any more ideas. He lifted his things, Snape's mug standing out as most unusual among them. "Will you help me find the office? I've got things to set down." They inspected him with narrowed eyes for another moment before saying in one voice, "Sure. Trust the boss to get lost going to the place he's at every day." Dazai shrugged like it couldn't be helped. "That's what I keep you around for." George chuckled, but something about it felt forced. "But only," Fred said purposefully, "because Madame Pomfrey went home over break. Otherwise, we'd be taking you straight to her. We should still go. I bet we can figure out her medicine cabinet. Bet Perk would give us a pass if we did. Just this once." They trailed off. Clearly, this was a serious consideration for them. Silently, Dazai cursed his father's ghost. Couldn't he have stabbed Dazai somewhere less conspicuous? This was all sorts of annoying. As always, people fussed over the strangest of things. Thinking this, he preemptively hid the now bloody part of his wrist. Dazai pushed past it best he could, knowing still that the twins had a bone they weren't ever going to let go of. Dogs. All of his stupid friends were dogs. Evidently reaching the end of their conversation, the twins shared an affirming nod. Then, in one swoop, each wrapped an arm around Dazai's shoulders. They guided him down the hall, though it was less guiding and more lifting him off the floor and carrying him. Semantics. Carted along, Dazai made himself relax. They'd done this before, picked him up and taken him somewhere. And though Dazai always made a point to complain about it, he trusted they wouldn't take him anywhere terrible. Once they made it to the office, Dazai would fake some lie about not wanting to talk about it, and the twins would stop bothering him about his eye. Though he really didn't want to talk about it, just probably not for the reason those two would inevitably think. Still, for the show of it, he grumbled. "You two are always so rough with your boss. I should have you fired. It's a part of our job," they said. Dazai rolled his eye. As they dragged him down one corridor and the next, Dazai let his mind wander. What he would say to get them off his back. How he would word his next letter to Mori. What he would ask Riddle later. When the twins let him down, Dazai blinked owlishly at their surroundings for several long seconds. "This isn't the office," he said dumbly. Fred and George winked at him. In front of them, the painted lady of Gryffindor sneered. "Nope," Fred said. "Even better," George continued. "Home sweet honorary home." Dazai looked between them. He quirked a brow. "Do I not pay you two enough?" "I said the office." "You don't pay us at all," Fred corrected him easily. "Ignoring all the money our scheme drags in, that is." "That's your payment," Dazai told him dryly. "That, and the pleasure of my leadership. Regardless, this is so much better, Snaky, because Percy's a prefect, so he can let us into the infirmary. I told you, Snape already looked at." While George told the painted lady her secret code of the week, Fred said, "I know you like Professor Snape, but he's actually maybe the worst professor in the whole school. I've seen Neville cry at just the sight of him. We don't exactly trust him with finer stuff like this." "He's fine," Dazai said, only half sure why he was defending his professor. Fred nodded, but didn't seem quite like he agreed. So when George opened the door and beckoned them inside, Dazai told them, "Forget about Snape then." Mori looked at it. "Surely you can trust an actual doctor." They crossed the threshold. "Don't take this the wrong way. Or do, that's fine too. But I think, maybe just a little. We trust your dad less?" Fred finally finished. Dazai stared between them, blinking. "You've never even met him," he argued. "But then again. Wait, actually you're right. Mori is an awful person all around. But patching me up is the only thing he's ever consistent at. So it's fine this once. Because Mori would never let him die." Of that Dazai was, unfortunately, certain. "Uh-huh." The twins hummed. "Not exactly inspiring confidence there, boss." Dazai rolled his shoulders, uncomfortable with all the attention his eye was getting him. He probably should have expected it, but had imagined in a burst of hopeful denial that no one would ask. The wound still stung anyway, and he didn't want to relive the scalpel gouging his face every single time someone asked. "You two, I thought I said to stay put. Oh, Dazai is here?" Dazai's eyes flicked up to see Percy standing stiffly by the lit fireplace. His pea sweater was worn proudly. When he saw Dazai was with the twins, his scolding expression shifted into something unreadable. His eyes widened when they landed on his bandage, because of course they did. Dazai shook himself from his thoughts. "Good afternoon, Percy," he said smilingly. "I missed Hogwarts so much I had Snape bring me back early." Percy frowned at the explanation, and the twins each put a hand on his shoulder. Dazai made to shrug them off, and though George relented, Fred's hand stayed firm. "Professor Snape picked you up himself?" Percy asked. When Dazai confirmed this, Percy's lip twitched oddly. He inspected Dazai's eye patch, and evidently reached some conclusion on it. His expression was somewhere between cordial and grim. "I see. Welcome back." "It's good to be back," he chirped. "There's always something interesting going on at Hogwarts." Percy shifted, and Dazai eyed the movement. George made a noise. "Were you bored at home?" "I was." Dazai put some extra cheer in his voice, though he felt very little of it. "I took a dancing lesson that made me dizzy, and Mori got me a new coat." He lifted his arms to indicate his Port Mafia joining gift. It swallowed him like a cloak or a casket. "Boring. You can dance?" Reluctantly. "I'd rather die than do a partner dance, though." Percy raised a hand, stopping Dazai from distracting the conversation further. Their eyes all snapped to him. "I am glad you enjoy your stay here." He cleared his throat. Then, predictable as ever, said, "Though I think you know I have to ask, as a prefect, your eye is fine." Dazai finished, not needing to hear the question asked. Again. Because of this, quite a bit of irritation snaked into his tone. The annoyance was genuine, and showed on his face because of it. "Promise. It's only because healing spells would make me sick. I have to keep it wrapped up. Everything is." He made a recognizable okay gesture with his thumb and index finger. "Okay. Now stop asking." Fred cleared his throat. hand tightening slightly on Dazai's shoulder. When Dazai squirmed, uncomfortable, Fred's eyes briefly lit with guilt. Only then did he finally remove his hand. Dazai let out a muted breath. It was quiet for a moment. Clearly, the twins were waiting for Percy to pass judgment. They expected him to fuss over the wound, but Dazai wasn't as sure. He and Percy were barely acquainted after all. Though, if he was anything like Gemma, Percy would do anything for the well-being of students. Then again, Dazai wasn't exactly Gryffindor. "I see," Percy said after pause. "If that's the case, you'll see Madame Pomfrey when she returns." "Ah, Snape said that too." Percy nodded. "Good. In the meantime, though it is against Gryffindor principles, I suppose you may stay in our common rooms. The twins have already dragged you here anyway, and it's only the 5 of us for the while. Only the Weasleys stayed over break, huh?" "Come on, Perk," Fred argued. "He's hurt. Let us sneak him into the infirmary for a checkup." Percy raised a brow. But something about it seemed forced, Dazai thought. "Honestly, I'm surprised you two came to me in the first place." "Well, we thought you would agree. Even Percy would break a few rules if it was for a hurt little snaky wakey." "Don't call me that," Desai grumbled. Percy considered them for a moment, his expression pinched when looking at Dazai again. He confirmed, "Professor Snape already looked at it?" Dazai nodded, cleaned and rewrapped it too. In that case, Percy folded, then unfolded his arms. He turned to his brothers. "You two, stop bullying Dazai. If he doesn't want to talk about what happened and a staff member has already cleared him, you shouldn't be forcing him around. That's tantamount to harassment." "But," Percy raised a silencing hand. The twins protested louder. Dazai sighed. He was getting a headache. Deciding he wanted to be a part of this discussion no longer, Dazai invited himself further into the Gryffindor rooms. As always, they were much warmer than the dungeons, but there was a perpetual chill on his spine, despite the heavy coat hanging off him. Dazai took the seat closest to the fireplace. It did little to fix the deeply set chill in his blood, but his skin was nicely warmed by it. He sighed. "Oh, Dazai." "Hello. I thought you'd gone home?" Dazai almost jumped. Almost. But he held himself still at the last second, and instead merely craned his neck to where the bedrooms were. Ginny Weasley stood by the door, smiling confusedly his way. "Ginny! You're looking well," he commented cheerfully. Ginny beamed. And she was looking well. Much, much better than she'd been last time. The deep, dark bags under her eyes were gone, her hunched figure replaced with a relaxed and friendly one. Ginny's hair was done into a neat braid, and when she crossed the room to sit near Dazai, her steps didn't stumble at all. She did gasp, however, upon seeing Dazai's face. Irritation licked at his veins. "Don't ask," he stressed. Then, at her continued bewilderment, he added, "If anyone else asks, I think I'll snap." There was a shift of movement at the other door, the boys' dormitory. "Dazai? What are you? Whoa. Mate, what happened to your eye?" Ron startled. "I'll bite you," Dazai said, dead serious. He snapped his teeth for good measure. Ron blinked several times, stupefaction written plain across his face. But weary self-preservation won out, and he didn't pry further. Moreover, he sat as far opposite he could from Dazai, who bit the air again to boot. "Yikes, why are we friends again?" Dazai grinned at him toothily. Ron responded only by making a face and shifting further into his seat. When he did so, a small black blob shuffled out from his robes and onto his shoulders. Tiny claws scrappled for surface. Angel blinked 2 beady eyes at him. Now it was Dazai's turn to look disgruntled. Unaware of the staring contest Dazai had picked up with Ron's pet, Ginny cleared her throat to get his attention. Dazai stuck his tongue out at Angel, then turned to face her. She bit her lip. "It's not, She looked around nervously and whispered, "To do with, Here," she mimed, writing in the air. And though she was clearly trying to keep the gesture subvert, Dazai still easily read her train of thought. That, and the guilty way she was looking him up and down, made it pretty obvious. "The diary didn't do that, did it?" she was asking. "I didn't do that?" Dazai smiled, consoling. He found a quick lie to put on his tongue. No, I got mugged. At the door, Fred, George, and Percy simultaneously ceased their bickering with a gasp. A second later, the twins had rushed to his side and were frantically patting the air around him as if to soothe some invisible miasma. "You were what? Why didn't you say?" "You know I like to be evasive," Dazai answered, cheeky. "You're going to give us heart attacks, Snaky." "Mugged?" Percy came up behind them. A hand on each of the twins' shoulders had them backing off reluctantly. Dazai covered his ears. "Stop yelling. Even Snape didn't yell this much." "Well, maybe he should have," Fred and George said together, emphatic. "You were attacked." "I guess," Dazai waved them off. "You guess?" Again, Desai brushed their concerns off. "This was annoying, and not at all productive. I've had worse, you know I have. Now stop fussing, please, it's giving me a headache." This seemed not to console the twins even slightly. And now the others, save for Ron, who was still watching Dazai twitchily, regarded him with similarly wide-eyed looks. Ordinary people could be such a minefield. Really, if a little blood sent them spiraling this much, Dazai couldn't even imagine what they would do if they ever had to go to Yokohama. It was unreconcilable. They would trip over themselves, trying to make sense of all that calculated violence. Yokohama and Hogwarts, no. Those two should never touch at all. Poppy shrugged uncomfortably, as the unnoticeable charm lingered over her for another successive minute. Her strength lay in the healing magics, and while she could use other spells, they were a struggle to maintain at length. She took a deep breath and carried on. Poppy walked through the busy streets of Yokohama, all but invisible to everyone but herself. She hadn't been sure at first if the spell would be necessary. Now it hung over her potently. After arriving at Yokohama's borders, it became abundantly clear she would not be gaining access legally. For starters, the city had some sort of immigration system in place. Only certain people were allowed in. Only certain people allowed out. Severus must have been expected the last few times he visited. Curious that there were only two paths into the city, a desolate train station and a long highway, also struck her as distinctly odd. Like Hogwarts, she thought, only accessible by train or apparition. Moreover, Poppy had been turned away within seconds of providing first D. Well, don't say Poppy never tried the peaceable option. After excusing herself to the restroom, Poppy had promptly cast the unnoticeable charm on herself. It was a high-level distraction spell she didn't often find use for, but was now thanking her rebellious teen years for taking the time to learn. The magic washed over her like a veil. She walked straight past the immigrations officer and onto the train. They didn't even blink her way, ignored and forgotten, just how Poppy wanted it. 30 minutes later, she was silently unboarding the train into Yokohama. An invisible passenger. Then Yokohama was sprawling out before her. Wow. She couldn't help but gasp. A few muggles twitched her direction at the sound, but their eyes quickly flitted over her, unfocused. Poppy pursed her lips self-consciously and pushed a little more magic into her spell just in case. The buildings were massive, stretching into the sky in the way only Muggle buildings did. The streets were bustling with Muggles on their phones or other devices. Poppy rarely saw so much Muggle technology in one place. It left her, briefly, baffled. A Ferris wheel on the horizon was lit up wonderfully even in the middle of the day. But Poppy didn't let her eyes linger on the scenery too long. She had a goal, too serious and too anger-inducing to let anything distract her. Thinking this, she retrieved the slip of paper from her suit jacket. It was an old missive between Severus and Mori Ugai, written over a year prior, and arranging a meeting between the staff and Mr. Desai. Included within was a certain address, Dazai's house. Steeling her shoulders, Poppy began her exploration of Yokohama. Though it was a bit difficult with the language barrier, she managed to make some sense of the city's layout. And what she couldn't, a quick translation spell managed for her. Flashing signs, gesturing people, and a single skyscraper that seemed to tower over all the rest. But for all entering the city had been strange, Poppy found herself agreeing with Severus's initial sentiment. Yokohama was achingly normal. Well, she assumed. It was difficult to say with Muggle cities, but she was managing quite well. And despite their suspicions, Poppy saw no sign of magic in the streets, or any other kind of Power. Honestly, Poppy was still reeling from the reveal of special abilities, but there was no time for distractions, not now that she was working to maintain the unnoticeable charm. The longer she kept up the spell, the more she risked magical exhaustion, so Poppy kept her gawking and speculating short. Her focus was on her destination alone. Dazai Osamu's house ought to be. She turned a corner and a brick apartment building came into view. The address on her letter matched the numbers by the door. It was unassuming, pedestrian. Despite herself, Poppy found herself thinking that someone with so much character like Desai should live in a more interesting house, perhaps wide open windows, or an ornate metal-worked door. Not this apartment building, which looked like it could have belonged in any town on the earth, on any street corner, anywhere. Poppy considered the building for a few short moments. Only after realizing she'd need to either knock or use an unlocking charm did she let the unnoticeable charm dissipate. It was like dropping a weight from her shoulders. Poppy let out a tiny breath. A light-haired boy 4 steps to her right suddenly jumped at her unannounced appearance. Poppy smiled at him apologetically. His eyes narrowed at her, clearly suspicious of something. Though Poppy didn't worry over it, the boy was a muggle. He would hardly think to suspect magic. She was about to write him off as a random passerby when she remembered the location. Perhaps this boy is a neighbor of Dazai's, she realized with some excitement. That cleared things up for her nicely. "Excuse me, my dear," she called. The boy continued on his way. Irritation threatened to bite over her, before Poppy suddenly realized she had called out in English. Sheepishly, she cast a translation spell over herself. "Excuse me?" she called again. Though it was English to her ears, the boy would his preferred language. Seeing as they were in Yokohama, Poppy assumed that was Japanese. "Young sir, He spun around to face her, a kind of scowl on his face. "What?" Poppy blinked at his tone, then pointed a sneer of her own his way. She was hardly in the mood for games. Not when a student of hers was likely being hurt just beyond that door. "This building, you live here?" He looked to the building, then back to her. He said, looking away briefly. Then, with a raised brow, he asked, "Do you?" I don't," she said. At once the boy's tension seemed to melt. Curiosity took its place. "A patient of mine does. I was supposed to check up on him today, only he never showed up." The boy made a face. "And he lives here?" "Yes. He'd be about your age. Do you know?" "I don't know anyone who lives here," he cut her off. "And I don't know why you would want to." "Huh?" Poppy blinked. This seemed like an affluent part of the city. Pleasant, clean, crimeless, like Severus had said. But it has a bad reputation. Interest pooled in her gut, where it mingled with that persistent worry. The boy continued, cautious. "You're really looking for some kid who lives here?" Poppy nodded. He seemed to consider that for a moment. Slowly he raised a hand to point somewhere behind Poppy. She craned her neck around to follow the gesture. After a second of searching, her eyes landed on the tallest building in Yokohama, the one that towered above the rest. It seemed to be casting a shadow over them, even here. If it's that important, go visit him at work, then. Poppy considered the building. It was looking down over everything, massive. It caught the sun and clean windows sparkled. So Dazai was there. Wait a minute. Poppy whirled back to face the boy. He staggered back half a step at the sudden movement. "Work?" she asked a little shrilly. He winced. Duh. Everyone knows Port Mafia owns these apartments. If your kid lives here, he works there. Port Mafia? Within the next several hours, Desai and the twins had managed to hide no less than 5 glitter bombs around the Hogwarts campus. At least 3 of them wound up in Lockhart's classroom. One was in Filch's office, and the last bomb, despite Dazai's protests, was now sat in Snape's classroom. The whizzing pop sound of glitter bombs exploding had joyfully marked Dazai's return to Hogwarts proper. Naturally, Percy had not been invited to their escapades. Ron had, stayed back to keep him distracted, or, Dazai thought ruefully, as an excuse to avoid their shenanigans. Surprisingly, Ginny had tagged along, and though she spent most of the time standing nervously in the hall, there was a bright smile on her face always. When the sun was nearly setting, Dazai finally excused himself from their games. "Aw, are you sure, Snakey?" "Yeah, you can bunk with us in the Gryffindor rooms. Perk won't mind." "He might mind," Ginny piped up. "He might," Fred conceded. "But we're very convincing." George snorted. "Yeah, and Dazai can do some mean puppy dog eyes." The second he said it, eyes. Something like horror briefly slipped across George's face. His eyes guiltily flicked to Dazai's bandages. Dazai cleared his throat. After he had all their attention focused again, he said, "I'm sure. But there's some stuff I need to do tonight." And he brushed at his coat, where a whole bomb's worth of sparkly glitter had at some point taken up residence. When he shook, a snow of glitter fell around his feet. "I need to change." They laughed. Ginny made a sudden conscious effort to wipe the glitter from her own robes as well. "If you say so," Fred tittered. Lucky for Desai, and partly by design, their shenanigans today had mostly distracted the twins from their earlier worries. They'd stopped walking around him on tiptoes after the first glitter bomb, and their eyes stopped lingering on his eye patch after the second. And though there was still some residual caution to them, it was only the typical big brotherness they always carried. Dazai was relieved to have avoided any more fussing. "But you know where to find us if you need us," George said. For anything, well, he'd avoided most of the fussing. "Some things are just unavoidable," Dazai thought with a sniff. "I'll probably get lost, if that's the case," he told them cheekily. Dazai spun on his heels to face a hall. "It's that way, right?" Fred choked. "To the Slytherin rooms? Absolutely not." "Bah, I'll figure it out," Dazai said, flapping a hand, much to Ginny's apparent bewilderment, and picking a direction to walk in. "Thanks." No, George stammered. He hurried to Dazai's side before the mafioso could wander too far. Dazai paused to look up at him. "I'm not about to let this train wreck go on. Fred, me and Ginny Winnie will head back to the common rooms. You make sure our little snake doesn't get lost?" "Oh, Fred, it's like you read my mind." Ginny rolled her eyes at their cooing antics. Dazai met her eyes and grinned impishly. Once the twins were done playing, they all said a fair good night. Then it was only Dazai and George who remained. They didn't waste time in standing around for long. Both Dazai and George far too accustomed to sneaking around to want to linger in one place for long. He turned to George and commented, "Did anyone ever tell you that you make a good guard dog?" George snorted. He patted Dazai on the back, and smiled when he didn't pull away this time. Then he began carting Dazai off in a seemingly random direction. "If they have, it was definitely you." "Well, that's because it's accurate," Dazai sniffed. He stepped around George so the boy was walking on his bandaged side, covering the blind spots Dazai couldn't. "I want to go to the office, by the way. None of my things are in the dungeons." George blinked but didn't comment on the change. "No?" Dazai shook his head. When a second later George turned them left, Dazai assumed it was to correct their pathing. Though he couldn't be sure, as all the hallways here were familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. "How's that?" George asked, squinting down the corridor. Dazai quirked a brow. "I keep my stuff in the office. It's easier that way for everyone. Anyway." He paused to hop onto the staircase before it could start moving without him. "I'm surprised you haven't noticed." "I'm not exactly subtle." George frowned at that. Possibly, he was envisioning the office in his mind, where Dazai's things were scattered about the place purposefully. His blanket and pillow, his books, hell, even Featherbrain had taken up a semi-permanent residence there. He shook his head, scowling now. "I wish things could be better. I wish you could feel safe in your own school, I mean," he continued, voice low. Dazai rarely, if ever, heard such a subdued tone on his usually boisterous subordinate. "But pranks can't fix that," he muttered. "It's fine," Dazai told him breezily. George's face did something funny. "It's really not." "Hey, Dazai, you said you were mugged. It wasn't because someone recognized you as the demon student, right? I mean, what if someone attacked you here?" It wouldn't be the first time, Dazai thought unhelpfully. Quirrell and Pansy. And anyway. Mori's smiling face flashed across his mind's eye. Dazai wasn't supposed to feel safe here. This was a job. And as long as people wanted him dead, he was doing it properly. Mori needed people to fear him, to create hysteria. So Do could swoop in and save the day. Problem created, problem solved. Still, the whole situation reeked. Dazai sighed, feeling illogically like he'd been duped somewhere along the way. Maybe it was because he was missing a chunk of his face now, but everything felt terribly unbalanced. "That's what I have you for," Dazai said after a momentary pause. George blinked out of his thoughts. When he saw how Dazai's lips were quirked upwards, he smiled smally as well. "Yeah? Sure. My loyal guard dogs, you and the other one." George laughed. "I know you can tell Fred and me apart, boss." Dazai's eyes slipped shut as they walked and his head tilted back, confident. George's guiding hand wouldn't lead him into trouble. "Can I? I forget," he drawled, and kicked his legs out childishly. Again, George laughed. It was a little less strained this time. "Even when things are tough, you always act so unaffected," he commented. "It's like you're used to being under fire all the time. I don't know how you do it, Snakey. Is that how it seems?" George hummed. They walked in a comfortable silence for a few moments. Then George lightly tapped his shoulder. "The office," he said. Dazai blinked his eyes back open. The office door was dead in front of them. He stretched his arms over his head, playing up a very real exhaustion. "Thanks, pet," Dazai said while double-checking his gloves were in place. He opened the door. A square of rainbow crystal light dyed his shoes immediately. The low sun cast a long leg. "Pick me up here tomorrow morning, or I'll get lost on my way to breakfast." George raised a brow at the new nickname, but only answered, "We can't have that, can we?" Dazai shrugged, feeling already less inclined to eat without Blaze here to poke him about it. Regardless, playing like this kept his gang in good spirits, and he wanted them at the top of their game. Always. "Nope," he popped. "You're all hopeless without me." George rapped a fist on Dazai's head, light and carefully avoiding his wound. "Yup. Ow." Dazai's head knocked down exaggeratedly from the hit. "Watch it." George chuckled, and his hand stretched out to smooth out some of Dazai's loose curls. Dazai pouted until George finally stepped back. All right, see you tomorrow, Snakey." Dazai raised a hand in farewell, and George did the same, albeit a bit more energetically. Dazai yawned in point, and George wasted no more time in leaving. Once he was alone, Dazai finally retreated into the office. The door shut behind him with a click. Presumably, it was locking itself to unwanted outsiders. Dazai could only tell that there was a high concentration of magic here, and little else in specific, but the office looked as it always did. His belongings were all in the same place he'd left them before winter break began. The stained glass window turned his face blue and red. Dazai shrugged off his coat and laid it out over the back of his chair. Mori's coat. Half of it sparkled in the yawning light. From somewhere above, Dazai heard a cooing noise. He glanced up, and Featherbrain descended from a beam to latch onto his shoulder. He shrugged at the sudden weight. Featherbrain dislodged herself a second later, and took residence on the desktop instead. Dazai collapsed into the seat tiredly. It had been a long day, a long week, a long year if he was honest. Sneaking egg out on the train, dodging prefects. Father's death. The Malfoy winter ball, Snape stealing him away. Winter break had no right being so jam-packed with activity. Dazai could just melt on the spot, finally catch up on what sleep he'd been missing, unable to fully rest in either Mori's or Snape's presences as he was. But there was no time to sleep now. Dazai knew that. He didn't need to sleep anyway. Strictly speaking, he could go much longer without needing to rest. It was only that the reprieve was nice and helped him to focus. Dazai smothered a yawn as he retrieved two items, one from his coat pocket, the other from his desk drawer. He set Riddle's diary off to the side for now. First, he needed to draft a letter to Mori. He made quick work of it. They'd spoken just a day ago, and there wasn't much to catch up on. But he did need to inform Mori of Madame Pomfrey's suspected whereabouts, assuming the boss didn't already know. Penning out the letter didn't take long. A note about Pomfrey, a request for further instruction, and a short scathing remark about Mori being a quack doctor. Signed, your favorite executive. Dazai folded the paper up once he was sure the ink wouldn't smudge, then tied it to Featherbrain's talon. She chirped at him questioningly. Back to Yokohama. You know the way, Dazai told her. She only tilted her head at him, and he sighed. Hide a few rats in his new office while you're at it, Featherbrain chirped again. This time, Dazai made a point of giving her a little shove, and though she protested, she did lift into the air. A second later, Featherbrain flew up into the rafters above and didn't return. Dazai eyed her retreat with a raised brow. Apparently, this awful magic office listened to everyone but him. Even Featherbrain got what she wanted, a secret exit up above. Desai puffed out a tired breath now that he was alone again. On to his second course of business, Tom Riddle's diary. He flipped it open to a random page. It didn't matter which, they were all empty. Even so, he could feel the faintest of magics in the book. Riddle was here and waiting. Tell me about the Chamber of Secrets, he wrote. The reply came a few seconds later. Why do you ask, Desai? I'm curious, he penned. Are you going to tell me, or shall I toss you in my desk drawer to never use again? There's no need for that, Riddle replied almost instantly. Dazai smirked, though the diary couldn't see it. Supposedly, Riddle began, the Chamber of Secrets is an ancient chamber hidden somewhere within the castle. Salazar Slytherin built it himself as a testament to his beliefs. Dazai waited for an explanation. When none came, he begrudgingly asked, Beliefs? Pure blood supremacy, of course. Ah, of course. Legend has it the chamber will only open again for the true heir of Slytherin. Even just in writing, Dazai could see the reverence Riddle had for that title, heir of Slytherin. He must be the heir himself, or otherwise was near enough to it, because in no way was Ginny associated with Slytherin politics. Still, Riddle had opened the chamber on his own accord then. Lucius sure had been playing an interesting game. Next, Dazai had to ask, and that's where the basilisk lives? Riddle stopped writing for a long moment. Then, figured that out, have you? Dazai ignored him. How are you controlling it? So eager to stop the petrifications, I see. Knowing won't help you. Did I say I was stopping them? Dazai asked, letters swooping sardonically. Riddle's ink stilled and bled out into a little pool. With his unoccupied hand, Dazai withdrew the knife from Mori's coat. He took off the one glove to better feel the edge of the blade. Then he flicked it open and closed mechanically. How did you control the basilisk? Ginny doesn't remember, so she's no help. Riddle didn't answer for another second, and Dazai got the impression he was deciding what to say. That was fine. Dazai had all night, and then some, to needle an answer out of him. Port Mafia's usual interrogation techniques were only slightly dampened by the fact that Riddle didn't have a physical body. Lest one wanted to count the pages of a book as a human's body, that was, which was about as morbid as trapping a consciousness inside a painting. Sometimes Dazai really hated Hogwarts. He pricked his fingertips on the knife while Riddle responded, Parcel tongue. Dazai frowned at the unfamiliar word, then waited for Riddle to explain. This time, Riddle seemed inclined to do so. The language of snakes, I can speak it so I can open the chamber and the basilisk will obey me. Ginny can't speak it. No, Riddle wrote, so a fresh kill does just as well. The basilisk is drawn to the scent of blood. Blood. The message by Mrs. Norris's body had been written in blood. Thinking about it now, Dazai concluded Riddle Ginny had likely killed some kind of animal. The basilisk was drawn to the smell of food and petrified Mrs. Norris while it was nearby. Still, he looked down to his wrist, where a tiny stain of red was staring out at him. That's awfully haphazard, Dazai said, imagining that the basilisk could have petrified just about anyone with that method, or even petrified no one at all. Nothing is without risk, Riddle told him. You're a clever boy, surely you know this. Dazai snapped the knife closed over his ring finger. A lance of pain shot through the appendage, and a few seconds later the slice turned bright red. A few drops of blood sluiced down his hand. Red splashed across the desk. It narrowly missed the diary, where Riddle's black script was still writing, asking what Dazai planned to do with this information. Dazai ignored him for now. His plans were his and his alone. Well, his and Mori's. Another drop of blood fell. Dazai stuck the finger in his mouth to staunch the bleeding, and the thick tang of iron coated his tongue a second later. With his free hand, Dazai shut Riddle closed mid-sentence. He leaned into the back of his chair, into Mori's waiting coat, and felt absurdly exhausted already. Dazai bit the wound so it would bleed longer. "See? She's been there for hours, sir," Hirotsu hummed. A curl of smoke left his cigarette as he stared across the street. Smoking was never as satisfying as after a successful mission, but his fingers had been itching for one ever since Mori's takeover. Across the street, a gray-haired woman was sitting on the bench. She seemed to be minding her own business, completely inauspicious. An old lady idling in the middle of a busy city. Occasionally she would shift in place, or her eyes would wander to the top of the skyscraper and back, but she never did anything more than that. Hadn't even taken out a phone to tap away at. Just sitting, staring. Across from the Port Mafia's main headquarters, a stranger. Yokohama didn't have strangers. He sighed, blowing out a cloud of smoke. The grunt beside him coughed. No one noticed her at first, but Takashi saw her on the cameras about half an hour ago. She hasn't moved. "Do you think she's a spy?" Takashi asked, bouncing on his feet at Hirotsu's other side. "For who?" Hirotsu asked tiredly. For all Port Mafia had enemies, their current biggest problem was themselves, resettling the dust after the previous boss's death. He tapped his cigarette, and ashes fell around him. Then, he dropped it to the cement and ground it out with the heel of his shoe. "Keep an eye on her. If she leaves, follow her." "Yes, sir," Hirotsu nodded. Without another word, he turned on his heel back into the building. The receptionist waved politely at him. Hirotsu inclined his head in reply. He wasted little time with pleasantries and beelined for the elevator. The guards there, who were typically quite persnickety with letting people past, let Hirotsu ride up to the highest floor without fuss. His reputation preceded him. The elevator ride lasted over a minute, but made no other stops along its ascension. Finally, the elevator door dinged open. Hirotsu waited another full minute for the guards on this floor to let him pass. Naturally, security was tighter on the boss's floor. Even Hirotsu's prestige couldn't afford him that kind of leniency, and when Hirotsu was finally permitted entrance, he strolled past the guards as though they had never been there to begin with. "Boss," he greeted. Mori didn't turn around from where he was gazing out onto the city below. It stretched out as far as the sea. "Hirotsu, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "There's a woman by the entrance." "Not of Yokohama," Hirotsu said. His eyes fell to the desk, where Elise was kicking her legs energetically, dress flashing out with every movement. She didn't look at him. Mori hummed. His arms were crossed behind his back, unstressed. "Describe her." Hirotsu did. He was clinical to the point of perfection. Mori nodded along like he wouldn't tolerate any less. "I see." The boss tilted his chin, eyes still on the horizon. "She's a pawn in Desai's current job. Though I wouldn't think she'd come all the way here just for him." Hirotsu had been given no information on whatever scheme Mori'd had Dazai running for the last 2 years. No one had, he didn't think. Whatever this game was, it was big. And secret. Still, Hirotsu had no desire to be involved if Mori did not require him. "Shall I dispose of her?" he asked, perfunctory. Mori considered this for a moment. When he reached a conclusion, he finally turned around to meet Hirotsu's eyes. In the same motion, his hands came to rest on Elise's shoulders. The girl squeaked out a protest, but didn't squirm away. Mori's eyes had taken on a darker shine since becoming boss. Hirotsu could see that now. "No," Mori said. It would be a problem if her death was in any way connected to Yokohama. The sky was turning black behind him, but the city was just coming to life with burning neon lights. The only kind of star you could see in a city like this. Mori shared with him a private, pointed smile. "She's Dazai's problem anyhow. He'll dispose of her personally."
Thank you and subscribe for more Bungo Stray Dogs fanfictions. Let me know what was your favorite scene.